They were mocked as filthy women, until those girls set fire to the tax office with a bomb. Bra, the alley behind the Cat-Wagon, glowed just wrong like satin soaked in kerosene. Dusty Fork lay still beneath a sky the color of bruised peaches heavy with heat judgment, and the kind of silence that meant men were plotting something ugly. Daisy LaRue crouched by a stack of empty gin crates, her corset laced tight, her smile painted wider than the truth. In her gloved hands a bundle of dynamite dressed in lace and rouge powder. Her fingers were steady, her eyes colder than a banker's mercy. Tonight was the mayor's decency parade. And Daisy, she was about to give them a fireworks show they'd write into sermons. A drop of sweat rolled past her ear. She didn't wipe it, didn't flinch, just kept twisting the wire with quiet precision. That same wire once wrapped around her brother's wrist before they sent him to the chain gang for stealing bread he never took. They called her a soiled dove. That was fine. Doves had wings. A faint rustle from the back door. Sugar May's voice low, teasing sharp, "You sure this'll work, Boom Bell?" Daisy grinned. "Darlin', if it don't, then hell's about to get a powder touch." Cue a harmonica wail and a slow zoom on the corset full of TNT. You ready to ride stranger Dusty Fork's about to blow sky high. The wind, a relentless sculptor, carved the very bones of Dusty Fork, 1884. It carried the grit of the mines, the sour tang of spilt whiskey, and something else, a silent, suffocating despair that clung to every rough-hewn plank and every weary soul. This was a town built on the raw, brutal promise of gold, a place where dreams were swallowed whole by the earth and hope was a luxury few could afford. When Madame Fifi's Cat-Wagon clattered into view, a gaudy, defiant splash of faded crimson velvet and tarnished brass, it was less an arrival and more an imposition. A traveling cage it was for the soiled doves within their laughter as brittle as the dry tumbleweeds scuttling across the dusty main street. Inside the wagon the air hung thick, a cloying perfume of cheap powder-stale tobacco and the unspoken weight of countless lonely nights. Daisy, Boom Bell, LaRue, moved through it all with a practiced grace, her silk gown rustling like a whispered secret. Her smile, a masterpiece of artifice, was painted on a vibrant, unyielding shield. It promised sweetness, a fleeting comfort, but beneath its bright veneer, her eyes, a startling blue, were sharp, calculating. They didn't merely see the men who stumbled through the door. They measured every man who walked into her room, dissecting their desires, cataloging their weaknesses, each glance a silent, damning judgment. Daisy was a paradox, a fragile bloom in a desolate land, yet within her a simmering fire, a quiet rage that had been banked for far too long. She was the illusion Dusty Fork craved, and she wielded that illusion like a blade, carving out a small, desperate space for herself in a world that sought to consume her. "Another thirsty one, Belle," whispered Lucky Lou, a pale girl whose beauty was fading faster than her hope. She leaned against a chipped mirror, idly filing a nail. "Looks like he hasn't seen a woman in a year, or a bar of soap in 2. Daisy didn't break her smile for the burly miner now leering at her. "They always are, Lou. Thirsty for what they can't have. And for a bath, apparently." Her voice was soft, laced with a weary cynicism that only Lou would catch. In the wagon's dim rear, where the gas lamps flickered like dying embers, Sugar May Delgado hunched over a small sputtering stove. The air here was different, laced with the sweet, acrid scent of burnt sugar, mingling with something sharper, something metallic. Her nimble fingers, stained with grime, and a faint reddish dust, meticulously packed a fine gray powder into the hollowed-out shells of old rag dolls. This was no ordinary confection. This was fire candy, crude, volatile gunpowder disguised with a child's innocence. Sugar May, with her dark braided hair and eyes that missed nothing, was the silent architect of their survival. She was from the borderlands, a place where the earth yielded its secrets to those who knew how to coax them out with dynamite and grit. Her knowledge gleaned from the dusty, dangerous world of miners and demolition men was a stark contrast to the delicate lace and ribbons she wore. Each time the raucous laughter of a patron echoed from the front parlor. Her jaw tightened, and a spark, cold and dangerous, flickered deep within her dark eyes. "This batch smells potent May," Madame Fifi's raspy voice cut through the air. The madam, a formidable woman with an even more formidable stack of rings on her fingers, appeared at the archway. She sniffed the air, a calculating glint in her eyes. "Good. We'll need it. Unless Van Greaves decided to take up embroidery instead of extortion." Sugar May merely grunted, not looking up. "Always do, Fifi. Always do. Embroidery would be less messy at least." The oppressive weight within the Cat-Wagon grew heavier still with the news that slithered in cold as a rattlesnake. Hollis Van Greaves, the town's bloated mayor, its self-appointed patriarch, had decreed a new tax on every smile. His jowls quivered with self-importance as his cronies delivered the message. Anyone who refused, they sneered, would be dragged to the town hall right into his court. It wasn't just about the money. It was about humiliation, about stripping them of the last vestiges of their dignity. They were already treated as property, and now they were being forced to pay for the very air they breathed, for the very act of existing. The accumulated slights, the casual cruelties, the constant grinding oppression, it all coalesced a bitter burning knot in Daisy's chest. Another tax, Daisy. "On our smiles," muttered Rose, adjusting a stray curl. Her eyes, usually full of warmth, held a flicker of cold anger. "What's next?" "A tax on breathing." Daisy watched Van Greaves's grinning lackey leave. "They're tightening the screws, girls. Always are." Her voice was flat. "They want to squeeze us dry like a lemon after a long night." The fuse, however, was truly lit on a night when the rain lashed against the wagon's canvas roof like a furious drummer. June Bug knew. To the Cat-Wagon, fresh-faced and fragile as a wildflower after a drought, became collateral for a pack of drunken miners. Her thin, desperate cries pierced the flimsy walls, tearing through Daisy's carefully constructed composure. The sound, so raw, so utterly helpless, was a mirror reflecting Daisy's own past, a ghost of innocence long lost. This time the rage could not be contained. Daisy moved a blur of crimson and fury, pulling June Bug from the grasping hands, the girl's face pale and tear-streaked, smeared with dust and fear. "Leave her be." Daisy's voice, usually so controlled, snapped like a whip. She shielded June Bug, her body a defiant barrier. The largest miner, smelling of cheap liquor and arrogance, stumbled forward. "She's ours. Bell paid for, don't you try to play saint, you ain't one." Daisy's eyes, normally veiled, flashed with unadulterated fire. "She's no one's. Not anymore." She held June Bug close, the girl trembling violently. "You lay another hand on her, and you'll regret the day you were born." The miner hesitated, surprised by her ferocity, a flicker of something akin to fear in his bleary eyes. Then with a grunt, he backed off his comrades, grumbling. Daisy turned back to June Bug, the girl's face buried against her shoulder. "It's all right, honey. You're safe now." Then, looking past June Bug, past the trembling girls and the retreating miners, Daisy's gaze met Sugar May's. A silent understanding, grim and resolute, passed between them. Her voice, usually a soft murmur, deepened, resonating with a dangerous conviction that cut through the stale air of the Cat-Wagon. "Maybe it's time we stop being the joke and start being the punchline." The words, simple yet profound, hung suspended, a promise whispered into the suffocating silence. It was a declaration, a spark igniting a wildfire. The Velvet Revolution had begun. The air in the Cat-Wagon, thick with the lingering scent of desperation and cheap perfume, now hummed with a new dangerous energy. The tremor from June Bug's terror had settled into a hard, cold resolve. Daisy, her public smile now a private grimace, called a clandestine meeting in the dead of night after the last drunken miner had stumbled out and the wagon lights were doused. Around a small, rickety table in the madam's cramped office, a space usually reserved for counting coin and complaints, sat Daisy Sugar May Rose, Lucky Lou, and a quiet, formidable woman named Clementine. These five were the heart of what would become the Powder Petticoats. "All right, girls," Daisy began, her voice a low, steady murmur cutting through the creaking of the wagon. "We're done being the punch bags. It's time we became the punchline for real." She looked at each of them, her gaze unwavering. "Anyone got second thoughts? This ain't no game of checkers." Rose, ever the pragmatist, fiddled with a loose button on her bodice. "Second thoughts. Darling, my first thoughts were, can we really blow up Van Greaves' outhouse? My second thoughts were, let's aim higher." A nervous titter ran through the group, quickly stifled. Even in their despair, a spark of gallows humor flickered. Sugar May, always more comfortable with actions than words, simply pushed a collection of small, crudely fashioned clockwork mechanisms onto the table. "These are timers. For the fire candy. No more guessing how long till the boom." She demonstrated with a steady hand, assembling a tiny gear train. Her fingers, usually caked with grime, now moved with a delicate precision, threading fine wires through miniature detonators. Pieces so small they might be mistaken for fragments of a broken locket. Their training grounds became the wagon's cramped dressing room, a space usually filled with the rustle of taffeta and the clink of jewelry. Now, under the shroud of dusty blankets hung over the windows, it transformed into a clandestine workshop. Moonlight filtering through cracks illuminated their focused faces. They learned to assemble rudimentary time bombs, their fingers fumbling at first, then growing adept. The tiny clicks of the clockwork mechanisms mingled with the soft thuds of their fire candy dolls being carefully packed. "Imagine," Lou once muttered, a giggle escaping her lips, "all this trouble just to avoid paying a smile tax. Van Greaves will rue the day he invented that particular cruelty." Daisy often took a quiet moment to observe Sugar May, who was teaching them. May's hands, so capable, so fearless, moved with an engineer's confidence. "You're a natural, May," Daisy once said. May grunted, tightening a wire. "Just got a knack for breaking things, and making things go boom." She then produced a tube of sticky black paste. "And for these, we use false eyelash glue. Sticks like sin, holds like a prayer." A shared wry smile passed between them. The girls embraced their new roles with a fervor born of desperation. Sugar May, armed with her keen eye and a steady hand, became their primary scout. Armed with an eyeliner pencil, she sketched out the mayor's mansion by memory on scraps of paper detailing guard patrols and weak points. Her compact mirror, usually for touching up rogue rouge, became a tool for surveillance, catching reflections of movements unseen, glints of light from hidden nooks. "He moves like a fat rooster strutting," she reported one morning, a rare smirk on her lips. Too proud to look around him. One damp, chill evening, a shadowy figure slipped into their secret meeting space. It was Madame Fifi herself. Her eyes, usually hard and calculating, held a strange, almost nostalgic glint. With a theatrical flourish, she produced a small, ornate wooden chest. Inside, nestled on crimson silk, lay a collection of antique bullets and a small but potent hand cannon. "I was once an artillery gunner for the French Revolution," she declared, her voice surprisingly steady. "But don't you ever dare tell a soul. It would ruin my reputation." The girls exchanged wide-eyed glances. Their madam, a revolutionary. The revelation, though humorous in its absurdity, solidified their purpose. Slowly, subtly, the atmosphere within the Cat-Wagon began to shift. It was no longer just about survival, about enduring the endless parade of crude men and crueler expectations. A new word began to echo in the whispers after dark, a forbidden, potent word: honor. They weren't merely fighting for escape. They were fighting to reclaim something they thought long lost, something that lay buried beneath layers of societal scorn and self-loathing. Each click of a detonator, each whispered plan was a defiant assertion. They were soiled doves no more. They were the Powder Petticoats, and they were about to make Dusty Fork remember their names. This time not with a smirk, but with a bang. The night of the Cleopatra and the Three Princes show was a carnival of garish lights and drunken cheers in Dusty Fork. Every miner rancher and slicker from miles around had crammed into the makeshift tent theater, drawn by the promise of painted flesh and fabricated spectacle. Daisy, shimmering in a gown of iridescent green, played Cleopatra, her smile wider, her eyes brighter than usual. Beneath the heavy stage makeup, a pulse thrummed fiercely at her temple. This wasn't just a performance. It was a distraction, a grand, glittering deception. Every twirl, every flirtatious glance was a drumbeat, counting down the seconds until the true show began beneath their feet. "You look positively lethal, darling," Madame Fifi hissed, adjusting Daisy's elaborate headdress backstage. "Like a viper about to strike. My compliments." Her eyes, usually shrewd, held a flicker of genuine pride. "Only trying to earn my tax-free smiles." "Fifi," Daisy replied, a dry edge to her voice. "And give these gentlemen a show they won't soon forget. Or ever recover from," she added silently. On stage, the Three Princes, three of the Cat-Wagon's burlier bouncers dressed in absurd, ill-fitting desert garb, chased Daisy's Cleopatra around a cardboard pyramid. The crowd roared, tossing coins onto the stage. The climax, Daisy knew, was approaching Cleopatra's grand entrance on her silken serpent, a rather large, poorly disguised green rope. This was Sugar May's cue. Below the stage in the damp, rat-infested crawl space that served as the mayor's private storage, Sugar May moved like a phantom. Her usual drab work clothes were replaced by a tight dark outfit practical for crawling. She clutched a small satchel, the fire candy, nestled safely inside their doll casings. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and stale cigar smoke, a fitting aroma for Van Greaves's lair. She found the safe and imposing iron beast tucked behind stacks of dusty ledgers and empty whiskey barrels. It was even more ornate than her sketches. "Just like a man, to make his money harder to get to than his heart," Sugar May muttered to herself, her breath pluming in the cold air. Her fingers, nimble and precise, began to work, not on cracking the safe, but on affixing the bombs to its reinforced hinges, just as Daisy had instructed. These weren't meant to blow the safe open. They were designed for a different kind of message. Above the show was in full swing. "Cleopatra rides her silken serpent," the makeshift announcer boomed. The crowd erupted, craning their necks, as Daisy, perched precariously atop the wobbly green rope, was flown in a wide circle above the makeshift stage. It was a chaotic, wonderfully distracting mess. "Hold tight, Belle," Lou shouted from the wings, trying to keep the rope steady. "Don't want you tumbling into Van Greaves's lap. He might think it's an early Christmas gift." Daisy spotted Mayor Van Greaves in the front row, his fat face red with laughter oblivious. "Good," she thought. "Enjoy the show, you bad egg. The intermission's going to be a real blast." A tremor ran through the stage floor. A faint, almost imperceptible thump click from below. Daisy allowed herself a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk. Sugar May was done. But as the final curtain fell and the crowd slowly dispersed, a chilling discovery awaited them. Sugar May emerged from the crawl space, her face pale, her eyes wide, with a cold, terrifying emptiness. She walked straight to Daisy, ignoring the others. "It was empty, Daisy," Sugar May whispered, her voice barely audible over the receding chatter. "The safe, clean, empty as a preacher's promise." Daisy's heart plummeted. Empty, but yet the tax money, the profits, gone, all of it. And there were papers. Sugar May pulled a crumpled official-looking document from her satchel. He's been moving all his gold to the bank in Cheyenne for weeks. And this is an eviction notice for the Cat-Wagon. Says we're a public nuisance. Effective tomorrow." A collective gasp went through the Powder Petticoats. Their grand plan, their glorious symbolic boom, it was all for naught. Van Greaves wasn't just collecting taxes. He was planning to dismantle them entirely to sweep their very existence from Dusty Fork. Just then, Rose, who had gone to check on Junebug, let out a sharp cry. "Junebug, she's gone." Daisy felt a cold dread claw at her throat. She rushed to Junebug's bunk. The bed was neatly made, almost too neat. Tucked into the ribbon of Junebug's worn hair was a small, stiff card. Daisy snatched it. Her eyes scanned the elegant looping script. The words felt like a slap. "Time to sweep the dust from Dusty Fork." The cards slipped from Daisy's trembling fingers. Junebug hadn't just vanished. She had been taken, and the message, so clean, so confident, hinted at a deeper game, a darker enemy. The burlesque blast had just revealed a much more sinister play. The real enemy wasn't just Van Greaves. It was the unseen hand pulling the strings. The eviction notice fluttered to the dusty floor of Madame Fifi's office like a death sentence. The Cat-Wagon, once their gilded cage, was now a ticking clock. "Public nuisance," Daisy spat, kicking the paper. "More like profitable nuisance to Van Greaves. Now that he's drained us dry, he wants to sweep us under the rug like so much dust." Sugar May, her face grim, pointed a steady finger towards the north. "The old church. It's abandoned. No one goes near it. Bad joss, they say." "Bad joss or good joss, it's a roof," Fifi declared, adjusting her rings. "And I know a secret tunnel into the cellar, used it once for special deliveries during the gold rush. A lady needs her champagne even in the wilderness." She winked a rare, almost human glint in her shrewd eyes. So under the cloak of a moonless night, the Powder Petticoats abandoned their gaudy wagon, their silken gowns rustling against the desolate landscape. They moved like shadows, carrying their meager belongings and Sugar May's growing collection of fire candy towards the decrepit silhouette of the old church. Inside it smelled of forgotten prayers and damp earth. Dust motes danced in the sparse moonlight filtering through the grimy windows like tiny lost souls. The basement was a labyrinth of cold stone and whispering echoes. And there, amidst the cobwebs and forgotten hymnals, sat Padre Felix. Blind, his eyes milky white, he sat at a rickety table, his fingers tracing patterns on a worn Bible. He was an old prospector, now having lost his sight and his flock, but his mind remained sharp-honed by years of hard living. "Well, well," Padre Felix rasped, his voice surprisingly robust for a man who looked half ghost. He turned his head, seemingly looking directly at them. "So the fallen angels come seeking sanctuary. Or perhaps a powder keg." He sniffed the air. "I recognize that smell. Nitrates. A good woman's perfume if she's got the right intentions." Daisy stepped forward. "Padre, we need a place. And a little more than prayers." Felix chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I used to be a trackman, missy. Blew up more mountains than most men have climbed. Bridges, tunnels. A little joss goes a long way with a good fuse." His words, laced with an unexpected wry humor, revealed his past as a railroad worker, a man who understood explosives better than sermons. He agreed to help, his blind eyes seeming to see more than most. Under his guidance, the damp, echoing basement transformed. They rigged a secret stage for what they called their last prayer meeting. "Every woman in town," Daisy explained, "will be invited to come cleanse their souls. And while they're here, we'll teach them how to cleanse Dusty Fork." It was a bold, almost blasphemous plan. Sugar May, under the Padre's tutelage, became a whirlwind of grim creativity. She concocted candy bombs so small they could be hidden within rosary beads. "No one ever looks too close at a rosary," she explained, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Especially not a man. They think it's just pretty pious things. Daisy, with nimble fingers, began to embroider explosive threads into their finest stage dresses, the metal glittering subtly against the dark fabric. These threads, she explained, would act as a network of conductive material, turning their gowns into walking, wearable fuses. "Looks like lace," Daisy mused, admiring her handiwork. "But it'll burn like hell." Meanwhile, outside the church, the town was stirring. Sheriff Cletus, a man whose face was as perpetually flushed as his reputation was tarnished, had accepted a hefty bribe from Van Greaves. He began to gather his deputies, muttering about cleaning up this town and ridding it of its undesirables. The word was out the Cat-Wagon was to be dusted off for good. Rose heard the whispers from the few sympathetic townsfolk. "Cletus is coming, Daisy, and he's bringing his whole crew. They ain't just looking to escort us out, they're looking for a fight. Then we'll give them one." Daisy said, her voice hard as flint. She looked at Sugar May, then at Padre Felix. "We don't run. Not anymore. We'll meet Cletus with something even God won't see coming." The air in the church basement, once heavy with the weight of prayers, now crackled with the fierce unholy resolve of the Powder Petticoats. Their fight for survival had escalated into an all-out rebellion. The sun beat down on Dusty Fork, a silent, oppressive weight as Sheriff Cletus, his face a beefy, determined scowl, led his deputies toward the abandoned Cat-Wagon. The air shimmered with heat, but an unnatural quiet had fallen over the town, broken only by the jingle of spurs and the creak of leather. Cletus, confident in his bribe and his numbers expected to find a few soiled doves, cowering ready to be driven out like stray calves. "This here's a clean-up operation, boys," he bellowed, his voice booming in the stillness. "Time to rid Dusty Fork of its unsightly elements." But when they reached the Cat-Wagon, it was utterly, eerily empty. No faded velvet, no cheap perfume, no sign of life, just the hollow echo of their own bluster. Cletus's face, already flushed, turned a deeper shade of puce. "Where in the blazes did they go?" he grumbled, kicking at a loose board. "Van Greaves will have my hide." Meanwhile, beneath the very ground they walked on, a different kind of sermon was unfolding. In the cool, damp silence of the church basement, the Powder Petticoats gathered around their secret stage. The flickering lantern light cast long, dancing shadows, turning their faces into masks of grim determination. The air hummed with barely contained energy, a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and the faint sweet scent of nitroglycerin. "All right, girls," Daisy whispered, her voice a steel thread barely above a breath. "This is it. Our last prayer meeting. And Padre Felix says the Lord works in mysterious ways, often with a good fuse." She gave a small grim smile. "Remember your steps. And for heaven's sake, don't trip over your own virtue." Sugar May, looking like a dark angel of destruction, methodically checked the candy bombs, nestled within the rosary beads, a faint, almost holy glow in her eyes. Timers set, fuses blessed. May the Lord have mercy on Van Greaves's ledger, 'cause his roof won't. Above ground, Mayor Hollis Van Greaves, oblivious to the seismic shift happening beneath his well-polished boots, preened before a small assembled crowd in the town square. It was a thinly veiled victory parade disguised as a speech on community morals. He swelled with self-importance, his voice oozing false piety. "My good people of Dusty Fork," he boomed, "we are on the cusp of a new era. An era of decency, where the moral fiber of our town will no longer be frayed by certain elements." He paused for applause, adjusting his silk cravat. "Frayed like his breeches after a big meal, more like—" Daisy muttered under her breath, a flash of pure contempt in her eyes. She stood at the edge of the town square, a striking figure in a blood-red gown, her hair swept up in an elaborate, defiant style. The dress, seemingly innocent, was intricately embroidered with the conductive metal threads pulsing with the silent power that would soon be unleashed. Rose, positioned near the old mercantile, caught Daisy's eye and gave a subtle nod. The other Powder Petticoats were in place, blending into the small crowd, each a demure velvet-clad fuse. The conductive threads on their gowns, painstakingly woven, formed an invisible network, a daisy chain of impending doom. As Van Greaves reached the crescendo of his sermon, proclaiming a purified dusty fork, Daisy took a slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd parted slightly, their whispers dying as her crimson gown caught the afternoon light. She was a beacon of defiance in the drab square. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a small, ornate silver compact. Not for powder, but for power. She held it high, a challenge in her eyes. Van Greaves faltered mid-sentence, his gaze snagging on her. His smug expression curdled. "You! What do you think you're doing, you strumpet?" Daisy's smile, no longer a mask, was sharp, genuine, and utterly terrifying. "You bought our bodies, Mr. Van Greaves." She called out, her voice clear and resonant, carrying across the stunned square. Every eye fixed on her. "You thought you owned our souls too, but you never read the fine print." Her fingers, with a delicate, deliberate motion, pressed the hidden trigger on the compact. Kaboom! Not a deafening explosion, but a series of precise concussive blasts. Clouds of perfumed dust erupted from strategic points around the square, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder. The ground vibrated. The fine, expensive lace on Daisy's dress shimmered with a fleeting, violent energy. The fire candy detonated not to kill, but to shock, to rearrange. The mayor's newly renovated mansion, standing grandly beside the square, shuddered. A loud rending crack echoed through the air as its ornate roof, the very symbol of Van Greaves's ill-gotten gains, sagged and then collapsed with a groan, sending a shower of splinters and plaster dust into the sky. Simultaneously, from various hidden points, a confetti of banknotes, the very tax money Van Greaves had extorted, erupted, fluttering down like a grotesque celebratory snowfall, carried on the wind and settling onto the bewildered faces of the townsfolk. Chaos erupted. People screamed, then laughed, then scrambled to grab the falling money. Van Greaves, his face ashen, stared at his crumbling mansion, then at the showering cash, then back at Daisy, who stood in the swirling, perfumed dust, an unholy angel of vengeance. His carefully constructed empire, built on greed and exploitation, was literally spectacularly crumbling before his eyes, its illicit gains scattered to the winds. The tax on smiles had just become the price of his own downfall. Daisy, watching the scene unfold, knew this was only the beginning. The Velvet Uprising had officially kicked off with a bang and a shower of stolen paper. This wasn't just a revolution, it was a performance, and the curtain had just fallen on Van Greaves's reign. The perfumed dust of the blast settled slowly, mingling with the last bewildered whispers of the townsfolk still scrambling for scattered banknotes. Van Greaves, spluttering amidst the rubble of his mansion, was a portrait of pathetic fury. But the real surprise walked out of the shadows. June, bug not kidnapped, but a silent, clever scout, emerged, holding a crumpled map. "I followed him," she whispered to Daisy, her eyes bright with a new fierce intelligence. "He had a secret tunnel to the bank, and to his other ledgers." Her small act of defiance, so quiet, had been key. The fallout was swift. Van Greaves, humiliated and exposed, was swiftly kicked to the curb by the town council, cited for endangering the community with his artistic explosion. Karma, Daisy mused, had a wicked sense of humor. Madame Fifi, ever the pragmatist, stood before the Powder Petticoats, her voice oddly soft. "Well, girls, the Cat-Wagon is officially dissolved." She surveyed them, a glint of something like pride in her eyes. "A good girl knows when to bow her head. A clever girl knows which way the wind blows and how to fly with it." She pressed a surprising wad of cash into Sugar May's hand. "This is for your future endeavors." Sugar May, for once, was speechless. She clutched the money, then looked at Daisy. I I'm going south, with Lucky Lou. There's talk of opening a new kind of establishment. Less smiling, more science. She gave a rare, genuine smile, pulling a small vial of nitrate crystals from her pocket. Always keep a souvenir. Daisy watched her go, a pang of bittersweet farewell. Then it was her turn. She boarded a train heading for Montana, a solitary figure against the vast, indifferent landscape. Her crimson dress folded carefully in her worn valise now concealed not explosives, but a single hefty gold piece, a half-smoked cigarette, and a quiet, knowing smile that belonged to no one but herself. The smile of a woman who had finally chosen her own horizon, no longer chained by others' expectations. The dusty West had taught her well sometimes to truly live, you had to make your own damn thunder. The perfumed dust of the blast may have settled in Dusty Fork, but the whispers of the Powder Petticoats still linger on the wind, a testament to what fire and velvet can achieve when pushed to the edge. They dared to write their own rules in gunpowder and lace, turning a town's mockery into a legend. If these fierce women could unearth such explosive truths, what buried secrets stir beneath your own world tap, that like if the echoes of their rebellion sent a shiver down your spine, and share this tale of defiant beauty with a soul hungry for untold power. Because next week the shadows lengthen and the West reveals a darkness far older than dusty towns and cruel men. Prepare yourself for the black-eyed child of Redemption Gulch. In a land scarred by silence, a hardened rancher buys a pregnant girl from an auction, only to find himself bound to a chilling secret, a child whose presence shifts the very air, drawing a war from the unseen. Can one man's unexpected love protect a force beyond understanding before the world decides its fate? Subscribe, now ring that iron notification bell, and keep your saddle cinched tight. Because out here in the untamed heart of the West, some legends are born not in gunsmoke, but in the deepest, most unsettling corners of the soul.